Welcome to the first of the summer webinar series hosted by American Majority and Manning Center. We're very, very happy to be partnering again this year with Manning Center on this series and to have all of you on this webinar. It looks like we have people calling in from all over the place in the United States and Canada, so this is going to be an international webinar, which is great. So I'll try to, as I go through the presentation and everything, I'll try to make everything as general and relatable as possible to everyone on the webinar and try to explain as best I can. My name is Nick McIntyre, and I am the director for American Majority Colorado. And we recently started a state chapter here in the state and are conducting trainings in Colorado, but we also do trainings all over the country and actually in other countries as well. So we offer trainings to conservatives for campaigns, for activism, and everything in between. So today we're focusing on messaging to the heart. What we're really trying to get at here is how to properly relate to voters in a way where they see you as a person and in a way that you connect with them on a personal level. Not exactly necessarily face-to-face, but face-to-face in your messaging, on TV or interviews, all that sort of thing. And it's something that as conservatives, we really, really need to improve on and get better at. So we're going to go through the webinar. There's a lot of information in here. The first half is kind of about framing, setting up what we're talking about. And the second half, we'll talk a little bit more about how to fix it and what we can do. And there are lots of slides, so don't feel like you need to write everything down or anything like that. Some of the things I'll be moving through more quickly than others. So get down what you can. Make sure you listen, most importantly, to the presentation as opposed to try to furiously write everything down. Also, we do encourage people during our trainings to live tweet, meaning to tweet about what we're talking about here during the presentation. And you can use the hashtag WIN2016 to get as the hashtag for the event. And we'll see those as American Majority and probably retweet some of those tweets and get something going so that people can see what we are discussing here today. So I'm going to get into the presentation here, make sure I got everything set up correctly. All right, so messaging to the heart, go for the heart. What does that mean for us in 2016? Oh, and sorry, there will be some people asking questions. I'm going to do a Q&A session at the end of we'll leave the last 5 to 10 minutes to do a Q&A. So I'm sorry if I can't get to everybody's questions during the presentation. I want to get through all of the material, and then we offer the presentations afterwards as well. You'll be able to get the slides and look at all that if you want that information. So just keep that in mind. All right, go for the heart. So what do we mean by this? This is a quote from David Horowitz. Conservatives need to stop talking like accountants and administrators and start speaking to voters' hearts. So this is a huge topic. What does this mean? It means that we need to, as conservatives, relate with voters and appeal to their emotions, appeal emotionally to them. The group of people we're talking about here is not necessarily your politicos, your policy wonks, the people who are already in your camp, the hardcore conservatives who are already going to vote for you. We're talking about here is your average voter who may not be very knowledgeable when it comes to politics, who maybe is not principally hardcore left or right, somebody who you have an opportunity to influence. And so we're talking about those middle voters. There's always a percentage of voters in the middle of every election that decide the election, because there's your hardcore Democrats that aren't going to vote for you, or your hardcore Republicans, or whatever parties you have in your particular country or state, and that means that we have this group of people, these average voters, that we need to really relate with, that we need to get to on a heart level. And liberals do a lot better job of this than conservatives typically do. So I'm going to be saying a lot of things today in an American context. There's going to be a lot of stuff about Barack Obama and the 2012 election, 2008 election. So bear with me on that if you can. If you're familiar with those races, that's great. If not, I'll try to explain things as best I can. In 2012, there was an election for president, and Barack Obama won this election, obviously, after racking up $5 trillion in debt, 23 million Americans unemployed, foreign policy in shambles, still is to some extent. And this tells us that we can't win elections based on the facts and on the results of an administration alone. Ultimately, elections are driven by the voters' emotions, not by the voters' reason. And we need to keep that in mind when we are campaigning. Liberals beat conservatives on this, hands down. They are much better at this than conservatives are. And conservatives, for a long, long time, have seemed either unwilling or unable to learn from losses. And one reason that liberals are so good at connecting on the heart level with voters better than conservatives is because liberals successfully accuse conservatives of these imaginary crimes. Okay, so what are we talking about by imaginary crimes? Okay, first one, waging a war on women. So we hear this all the time. Liberals are constantly and always good at making the perception that conservatives don't like women. You know, it's the argument that conservatives don't want equal pay for women in the workplace. It's the argument that conservatives don't support reproductive choice for women. That's how they mask the abortion debate. They constantly reach women in a way that appeals to emotions. And, excuse me, the conservatives don't have a great response to this. Likewise, liberals appeal to minorities better than conservatives do. Liberals say that conservatives don't care about minorities, minority needs. They're not willing to help minorities on a personal level. This is another huge one. Also, inflicting pain on working Americans to benefit the wealthy. So it's the argument that Democrats or liberals or progressives stand for the middle class better than conservatives do. The conservatives are here to help the wealthy, to make the rich get richer. And this narrative, although it may not be true and may be completely made up and there may be no factual basis for why they talk like that, it's very effective and it works in elections year in and year out. Conservatives seem to have no effective responses when it comes to neutralizing these attacks. There seems to be no good answer that conservatives on the whole have been able to come up with to combat this narrative. This narrative continues on year after year, election after election, at the local, state, and national level. So just as an example, one big thing that worked in 2012 was that progressives constantly attacked conservatives as defending the wealthy, like we mentioned before, the wealthy who are not paying their fair share. This was a narrative. Now, the United States has the highest corporate tax rate in the world. There are many arguments for why the wealthy may or may not be paying their quote unquote fair share, but ultimately the facts and the numbers behind that don't matter. What matters is that progressives use this narrative to drive their campaign points home to voters. Now, why were they able to do this successfully? Because conservatives don't have any good response. The constant response that we hear from conservatives on this issue is, well, that's just class warfare rhetoric. That's typical liberal class warfare rhetoric. They're trying to divide people based on money and all these other things. The problem is that answer doesn't actually answer the charge that conservatives are defending the wealthy and don't care. Even if you say, oh, it's class warfare rhetoric, well, that's defensive. We'll get into that a little bit more. But ultimately, it comes down to this issue that conservatives are uncaring, that conservatives aren't actually willing to accept, or accept the argument that they're helping the rich and they're just being defensive about it. Oops, let's here. This whole issue of caring is central to why liberals do this, or liberals are able to appeal to the heart better than conservatives are. Caring is not one among many issues. It is the central issue. Now, there's a ton of proof to support this. How crucial is caring? So one example, again, we're going back to 2012, mentioning this a lot today. This is really important. 70% of Asian Americans cast their ballots for Barack Obama in 2012. Well, when we're talking about the Asian American demographic, we're talking about people who are family-oriented, we're people who have very traditional values, lots of two-parent homes, very entrepreneurial, hardworking. Those are the basic demographics for Asian Americans in general. However, they still voted for Barack Obama, even though, in theory, Mitt Romney would have fit their values and belief systems better. Ultimately, it didn't matter because Asian Americans were convinced by Barack Obama in his campaign that Barack Obama cared for them. This whole idea that Barack Obama felt their pain, that he was looking out for them as minorities. And Romney didn't ever touch on that. He never went to that narrative. He never talked about these things, and it ultimately cost him the election. I want you guys to watch this this video quick. This is a campaign ad from 2012 that Barack Obama put out, and I want you to note not only the visual but the audio and the words in the ad, and see how it appeals to people. Now, I'm going to try to make this as loud as I can. If you can't hear it, I'll kind of recap the video after it's over, and there might be a little bit of a lag, but bear with me on that, and we will. I'll do my best here to make sure you can see and hear this.
2008, an economic meltdown.
Worst financial collapse since the Great Depression.
4.4 million jobs lost.
American workers were laid off in numbers not seen in over 3 decades.
America's economy spiraling down.
The biggest point drop that has ever been seen in a day.
All before this president took the oath.
So help me God.
Some said our best days were behind us, but not him.
Come back against the American worker.
He believed in us, fought for us. And today, our auto industry is back, firing on all cylinders. Our greatest enemy brought to justice by our greatest heroes. Our troops are home from Iraq. Instead of losing jobs, we're creating them. Over 4.2 million so far. We're not there yet. It's still too hard for too many. But we're coming back because America's greatness comes from a strong middle class. Because you don't quit, and neither does he.
I'm Barack Obama, and I approve this message.
Okay, so take note. I hope everyone was able to hear that. Just to recap, that was a campaign ad, and it discussed a ton of what we're talking about here. Connecting with people on a personal level. Now, you notice in that advertisement that there was very little substance. There was the one graphic that they showed for about 3 seconds of the 1-minute ad that discussed the jobs that were created throughout the Barack Obama administration from 2010 to 2012, selected years. And the rest of it was images of people, of Barack Obama sitting down with people, talking with people, families. There's some brilliant rhetorical devices that were used in that advertisement to convince voters that Barack Obama cared about them, such as using the image of the Tea Partier and saying some people didn't believe, but then bringing it back and saying, but he believed in us. And then throughout the rest of the advertisement, the whole thing was framed using the word we. We came back from this. We created all these jobs. It wasn't even partisan. It was just we. It was this collective idea. And that's really central to the liberal argument, to how they approach politics. And we will discuss a little bit more of that there. But I hope you guys see what a good ad that was, despite it lacking much substance. Okay, let's move on here. So, what would we say to that class warfare rhetoric? The problem is that this argument doesn't have a human face. It's political style. You noticed in the advertisement that there were human faces attached to the hardships. There were human faces attached to the successes that we got the auto industry back going. It wasn't just pictures of cars driving. It was pictures of people building cars. The argument that conservatives always use, there are these numbers-based arguments, and they don't ever have a face to them. Using terms like class warfare rhetoric, no face. Using terms like we need to lower taxes. Sure, we do need to lower taxes, but there's no face. It's not how you win elections. It might be good policy, but it's not going to convince people that they need to vote for you, especially people who aren't very ideologically motivated and vote with different parties and different ideologies from election to election. The nature of elections is people versus people. It's an adversarial argument. We need to defeat opponents. Liberals will decry conservatives saying that they're divisive and all of this and that. But ultimately, they engage in it just as much as we do, and we don't have any answer for it. The elections are about us versus them, and we need to really understand that in order to know how to frame our arguments when we're discussing. So if you look at these two, this is just kind of reiterating some of the same things, but more in a rhetorical sense. Conservatives, these are two different arguments here, these two sentences. Conservatives are defending the rich at your expense. And the response, the liberals are employing class warfare rhetoric. So when you see these two things, which argument do you think is going to be more effective? Which is going to make voters believe that the candidates care about them? Well, in the first one, you see conservatives are defending the rich at your expense. It means conservatives are doing something that is hurting me. Using words like your expense, conservatives are being evil because of what they're doing and it's hurting you, as opposed to this nameless, faceless, liberals are employing class warfare rhetoric. That's saying a sentence without really making a point. It's not actually affecting anybody. That's a feature of what they're doing, but it's not actually a result of anything. It doesn't actually mean anything when it comes down to it. So using arguments like that are completely ineffectual, and we need to get away from doing that. So what is the typical response from a conservative is, oh, this is just a misunderstanding. We need to actually look at the facts here. We're not that bad. When we say things like this, we need to look at the facts. Nobody cares about the facts. I'm sorry to say it, but this is about appealing to emotions. And a liberal, by saying that conservatives are helping the rich at your expense, have already appealed to the emotions. And if you let them do that and come back with a defensive response, like this is a misunderstanding, or we need to look at the facts, then you've already lost the argument. One thing that we always teach in all of our trainings is if you're defending yourself, you're losing. And for the second half of this presentation, we will get into how to go on the offensive. But keep that in mind, that if you're having to defend yourself from these kind of attacks and you're spending your time, energy, and money saying things like this is a misunderstanding, then you've already completely lost the argument. And year in, year out, at every level, state, local, national, we see this happening to conservatives because liberals are on the offensive and we're not. So when conservatives do mention their own victims, such as when liberals say conservatives are, helping the rich at your expense, conservatives have their own victims in arguments. But the problem is that the people who are their victim, that they mention as victims often, such as small business owners, job creators, people who are going to church or whose religious liberties are being infringed upon, those are people who the average American and the average voter already see as wealthy or well-off or well-to-do. If you're a small business owner, you must have money. If you're creating jobs, you must be rich because you're employing other people. These are somehow inherently evil things. So it's okay to say there's too much red tape on small business owners, but those faces can't be the only faces that we've mentioned as victims. We can't use the typical arguments saying, oh, well, it's our religious liberties are infringed upon. I have personally fought for religious liberty before, and so I understand this argument. However, saying that normal, middle class, white churchgoers are being downtrodden for some reason isn't necessarily an effective campaign tool, and the argument needs to be framed in a different way. So in 2012, a CNNexit poll was done, and one of the questions was, what is the most important candidate quality to your vote, or what are you looking for in a candidate? So there are typical responses here that you see from a lot of people. You want a leader who is strong, somebody, especially in the era of terrorism. You want somebody who shares your ideological values. A lot of obviously a lot of voters are ideologically motivated. Somebody who has a vision for the future. This is especially important on the national level when we're talking about presidential races. And the last one is cares about people. Well, I think you know where this is going. Which one of these do you think had the greatest impact on the election and the results of the election that year? Romney won the first 3 of those categories by 54%, but he lost the category cares about people by 63%. And that's the election right there. Barack Obama had a dismal record when it came to taxation, fiscal responsibility, foreign policy, etc. But he cared about people. So the rest of it just doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if Mitt Romney wanted to lower corporate tax rates by 15% over the next 3 years. That stuff is completely irrelevant when we're talking about the election. The reason that there's a disconnect here is because conservatives and liberals approach the study of politics with very, very different visions. Okay, so what do I mean about this? Scroll down here. Not only, they matter not only with the way each side sees the questions, but how they enter the political arena. Okay, when we meet in the middle for an election, and by meet in the middle I mean face off, the way that both sides approach the election and how the election is framed are completely different. So I'm going to give a little bit of a short history lesson here and just kind of set this up so that we have a good context and a good understanding of why liberals and primarily progressives, now I'm going to be talking about, approach this issue one way and conservatives a different way. The whole idea of moral and social progress is at the foundation of a progressive thought. Now, what do I mean by moral and social progress? It's this idea that somehow we need to reshape our society, reshape the culture to have a fundamentally different understanding of justice than the classical view. The classical view meaning the view of justice that the founders had. We've all heard the term, living constitutions and things like that. This is at the center of how liberals think, and it's at the center of how they campaign, and it's effective. We hear the term social justice all the time. This is not justice in the typical sense, like conservatives frame the argument, saying justice is the protection of private property rights, justice is freedom and protecting freedom. For liberals, social engineering is at the center of how they view what we need to do for society. Now, this manifests itself in the term social justice. That's a very general term. It doesn't really mean anything. It doesn't have any practical, policies that we can really point to. So what is social justice? It's just a term, but it's effective because people want to see other people succeed. People want to see lower income individuals lifted up into higher levels of society. This is the whole argument of rights versus, or equal rights versus equal outcomes. Conservatives see liberals as wrong about the issues. When we're talking let's say we're campaigning for office, one thing that you hear all the time, the conservative will say, oh, well, the liberals are wrong. If we have a 20% tax rate, then that's only going to lead to 3% growth. But if we have a 5% tax rate, we would see 10% growth throughout the year. Liberals, on the other hand, don't necessarily approach conservatives as wrong about the numbers. Okay, that comes up sometimes. But at the very core of the arguments is that conservatives are the enemy of goodness. They're the enemy of justice. They don't want to see justice, and we do. Now, if you're campaigning, which one would you rather be? Would you rather be wrong or would you rather be evil? Primarily, you would rather be the side that's wrong, because at least you're not the side that's evil. And liberals win elections all the time because the argument is framed in this way. We never go after liberals for being for having evil ideas or saying that they don't want to help people. We always go after them for being wrong on policy. Meanwhile, liberals see conservatives as evil people. This whole idea of glorious future comes into play. Everything that progressives do is about mobilizing their armies to bring about this glorious future or social change. And so they do this by one program at a time, one candidate at a time. They do it through organizations like Acorn that mobilize people all over the country to advocate for low income housing, for all these liberal initiatives. And ultimately, that argument and that approach is more effective than saying we need to get government out of the way and we need to not help people, because it comes across as though you're not caring. It comes across as though you are getting in the way of the future. It also creates urgency in a campaign. When a liberal activist goes to a home or is trying to recruit volunteers, they're going to tell them, you need to get on board right now because Mitt Romney doesn't want America to move forward. Now, I'm not trying to defend Mitt Romney here like he was the greatest candidate ever. I'm just using it as an example of liberal versus conservative arguments. Mitt Romney wants to get out of the way, or wants to get everything out of the way and just let our dreams go to the wayside. Therefore, he must hate you. You need to get on board right now because this election is coming up in a few weeks or a few months, and you need to get on board and make sure that Mitt Romney doesn't destroy our future and destroy this vision that we have for society. So what are some of the issues that we often see liberals employing or progressives employing to get people on their side? The whole idea of having guaranteed outcomes, guaranteed healthcare, guaranteed housing. We want a guaranteed income, whether that's through a government handout or through some work program or all the way back to the WPA back during World War II or the Great Depression. And then the right to happiness ultimately is what that comes down to. When a progressive says to somebody, I want to make sure that you're happy, that is much more appealing to the average voter than I want to make sure that nobody's helping you and that the government is out of the way. Now, again, we might know that that's what's right and that government getting out of the way is going to lead to more happiness. But if that's our only narrative and we're on the defensive on that, then we've already lost the argument. So I want to do another clip here. This is a clip from FDR. This speech was given in 1944, and this was during the time when FDR was promoting the Second Bill of Rights. It's not something that a lot of people realize. A lot of people have a view of FDR that he was a great leader and this and that and the other thing, led us through the Great Depression. But ultimately, FDR was trying to advance a very progressive vision that had started back with the German historicism age in the 1800s, that was promoted very hard by Woodrow Wilson in the teens when he was president, and then continued through Franklin Roosevelt, and continued through Lyndon Johnson, and continued through people like Jimmy Carter, all the way up to Barack Obama. So watch this clip and note some of the things that he says. I'll try to make sure this is loud enough again for everybody, and then I'll explain it afterwards. This video is a little more grainy and hard to understand, so I'll try to explain it more when he's done speaking.
In our day, certain economic proofs have become accepted as self-evident. A second Bill of Rights, under which a new basis of security and prosperity can be established for all, regardless of state or race or creed. Among these are the right to a useful and remunerative job, the right to earn enough to provide adequate food and clothing and recreation, the right of every farmer to raise and sell his products at a return which will give him and his family a decent living, the right of every businessman, large and small, to trade in an atmosphere of freedom freedom from unfair competition and domination by monopolies at home or abroad, the right of every family to a decent home, the right to adequate medical care, and the opportunity to achieve and enjoy good health, the right to adequate protection from the economic fears of old age, sickness, accident, and unemployment, the right to a good education. All of these rights spell security. And after this war is won, we must be prepared to move forward in the implementation of these rights to new goals of human happiness and well-being.
This clip, I think, is extremely telling of the progressive vision. And what do I mean by that? It's telling that this idea of guaranteed outcomes has been around for a long time. It's connected to socialism. It's connected to the same things that we're seeing today. This stuff has been around for a long time, but it's an effective narrative that people use, that politicians still use today, that we can guarantee happiness by somehow having rights that we're just making up. Because when it comes down to it, rights for progressives aren't set in stone. They're always trying to transform society into something new and better. They're always trying to overcome human nature by becoming a better people, by becoming a better collective. Now, most of us probably here in this webinar understand that is an extremely damaging way to view a system of rights, and that the United States Constitution doesn't make room for that sort of thing. There's a reason that the founders of the U.S. didn't put guaranteed housing and income and healthcare into the United States Constitution. But ultimately, that doesn't matter for them. And if you're in the way of that, then you're the enemy. And as conservatives, we need to view their side from this point of view. I'm not saying we have to understand it, agree with it, or anything. But when we're talking about campaigning, we're talking about changing, or not changing hearts and minds, but convincing people and getting to their heart to vote for you. That's the kind of thinking that we need to have. We need to know where they're coming from. Conservatives stand in the way of this. They stand in the way of caring for every man, woman, and child from cradle to grave. We know this. We should understand it. Conservatives, on the other hand, look at things differently. So this is the messaging that we often use in our campaigns. Politics is about restoring something that is old. We need to restore the Constitution. We need to restore our commitment to the founding documents. We need to get government out of the way. Slash it. Let's slash spending. Let's slash all these things. I agree with all of this stuff. We need to get government out of the way because it's a better narrative. We need to slash government because we're spending out of control and it's unsustainable. But we need to message those things in a way that makes progressivism wrong. That makes it appear, because it's true, that makes it appear that progressivism is extremely damaging to the future for our families, for our cities, for our nation. And this kind of messaging, it gets so stale, and it doesn't connect with people on a personal level at all, that it goes in one ear, out the other. For most people, we don't aspire to change the world. We want the world to change because people have freedom, because there's free markets. The world, we understand the world will change, but we're not coming with a message that we want to change the world for the better. Now, we do want to change the world for the better, and we should be saying that we want to change the world for the better. We shouldn't be avoiding that kind of language altogether. But we need to do it in a way that makes liberals and progressives look like the enemy politically. We're too caught up in selling, in repairing these systems that are broken. we need to get rid of the administrative state. We need to tweak this policy and do that so that we're better off this way. But ultimately, we need to be missionaries of a better society too. But we need to be promoting our ideas in a way that promotes freedom and also makes us look like the visionaries. Practical plans. We're constantly coming up with practical plans. We reach for facts and arguments, and we spend all this time explaining that to voters about how Bernie Sanders' healthcare plan, or about how Bernie Sanders' plans overall are going to cost $17 trillion. Now that's a fact, and that's a statement, and we should be saying that. But then we need to say why that's going to cause poverty and breadlines in our nation. Like, we need to take that to the next level and connect with people, and say, if this person is elected, then we will have serious problems, and it's going to happen to your children. This is hard for us, not only because we're not good at articulating it, but because this has been going on for so long that our arguments are oftentimes already not taken seriously, because the left has already made us the enemy of women. They have already made us the enemy of children. They have already made us the enemy of minorities. Conservatives aren't the enemy of anybody. They're not the enemy of women, children, or minorities, or the middle class. In fact, most of us here believe that conservatives are the ones that ultimately want to see those people exceed and not live under the thumb of government. But we don't message that way. We don't talk in a way that convinces people that we can actually do more for these classes or demographics or whatever you want to say, because we don't put a face on it. We must wage an equally emotional war and message to the heart. So I'm going to talk now a little bit, getting into the second half here, last 15 minutes, about the winning strategy. What can we do to do better than we have before? Okay, one, this might be good to note or write down as general rules. Put the aggressors on the defense. I've alluded to this a little bit before. We're constantly the ones on the defense. We're constantly saying that we need to look at the facts or that there's a misunderstanding. We need to make the left go on defense, because we're able to connect with people better, because our ideas are more sound and solid and more beneficial. We need to make the left defend why they are putting grandma onto the street, so to speak. We need to make them go after that. And how do we do that? Well, we put the victims in front of every argument in policy. Conservatives don't like to play the victim card. We are independent. We like to be left alone. We don't like to act like we're victims. I get that. That is all fine and good. But ultimately, like I was saying before with the class warfare rhetoric issue, we need to put faces in front of liberal policies and say, look at what you've done because of your policies to hurt individuals, to hurt families, to hurt children. I think a great example of this is the city of Detroit. I don't know if everybody here is familiar with Detroit, but the city of Detroit in Michigan has been run by leftist politicians for the last 50, 60 years. And it's completely destroyed their city. It's caused mass poverty, vacancy, crime. And it's been because of liberal policies that have dissuaded people from being around and losing jobs. Well, we don't put enough of those victims, of those people, in front of the liberal policies. We don't match those things together enough. We need to be matching those things up, not because we want to play the sympathy card or because we want to just put victims on there like a bad commercial, but because it's true. Because these are our families. These are the people that are actually being affected by these things, and people need to see that and need to know. And the last thing is that it needs to happen now. You need to start your campaign now. If you're not doing this in your campaign right now, connecting with people on a heart level, then you've already lost. then because the progressives have been doing this for years and years at every level, and they're doing it now at your level, whether you're running for mayor or you're helping on a congressional campaign or you're running for president of the United States. There are a few weapons in politics that we need to utilize better. Hope and fear are weapons that you can use to convince people, and weapons in the most fair game sense possible. What are the images, the videos, the sound bites, the testimonials that we need to use to reach people's hearts? Using imagery and video is something in 2015 or 2016 that they're all over the place. I mean, we're talking about on social media, we're talking about on the internet in general, news sources. Facebook video is getting bigger and bigger. Using these actual testimonials from people, actual sound bites from people, to use the weapons of hope and fear to convince people that they need to be on our side, and primarily put liberals on the defense. So the campaign narrative that we typically go with, if you're a conservative running for office, is the underdog. I don't know if you guys are familiar with the underdog. I'm just using it as an example here. In that conservatives like to mention their humble upbringings. So one example I like to use is Marco Rubio, who ran for president here in 2016, unsuccessfully. He oftentimes in all of his speeches would reference how his parents came from, he was a Cuban American, but how his parents sacrificed a lot to give he and his siblings a better life, how he used that opportunity to become successful, to go to law school, become Speaker of the House in Florida, all these different things. And that can be a very effective narrative, the rising from humble origins to prominence, not because of the government, but because of your own power and your own initiative. Now, this narrative isn't very strong on the fear side of things. Liberals, on the other hand, turn these arguments around on us and oftentimes are much more effective at using them. So instead of an individual being an underdog and rising to success because of his or her own action, liberals are the champions of the powerless underdogs. It's the government's job to empower that underdog. They would say that conservatives want to make it so that you can't possibly rise out of poverty, that you can't possibly get a better job. That's what conservatives want to do. But we, through the government and through our social engineering, through social justice, we will empower you to become better and become more successful. This is preying on fear primarily, but also the hope that we can have a better society and become a better people, overcome human nature. If you're an algebra class, you'd say, I understand that. But in a story, when you're storytelling, you say, I want to live like that. That's what I want to be like. And liberals are very good at doing that. We're going to watch one more quick video here. I know I'm getting a little short on time. I'm going to finish in the next 10 minutes. One more quick video. This is from a campaign speech in 2008 that Barack Obama gave in Minnesota. And I want you to note some of the things that are in this speech and the hope, fear aspects of this and how good this is rhetorically. Sure, this is on sound here.
Because if we are willing to work for it and fight for it and believe in it, then I am absolutely certain that generations from now, we will be able to look back and tell our children that this was the moment when we began to provide care for the sick and give jobs to the jobless. This was the moment when the rise of the ocean began to sail and our planet began to heal. This was the moment when we ended the war and secured our nation and restored our image as the last best hope on earth. This was the moment. This was the time when we came together to remake this great nation so that it may always reflect our very best selves. And
All right, so that video, again, very, very, very little on actual substance, on policy, but he's talking about things like rising tides of the ocean and becoming our very best selves, and it's this classic collectivism thing. Well, we all know in 2008, or most of us at least, know that that whole election was about hope for the future. And Barack Obama implored that like nobody ever had before. And he was extremely effective with this hope narrative. So how do we possibly combat something like that? Well, we need to take a page from their war plans. Now, what does this mean? This is a very important thing to remember. If you're going to pay attention to anything today, this should definitely be it. Benefits. Benefits, benefits, benefits. You need to craft your message in a way that conveys the benefits of your candidacy. That conveys that you're not only something, but you're going to do, or that you're not only someone, but that you're going to do something for the person that you're trying to get to vote for you. So when you're crafting your campaign message, first I want to talk about what is not a campaign message. And please, 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 when you're crafting these things, or if you're helping with a campaign or whatever it is, please understand this whole idea of message. The message of your 30-second elevator pitch, of your introduction in a radio interview, why you're running, things like that. So things that are not a message are, I'm a businessman, so I know business, or I'm a combat veteran, so I know how to fix terrorism. A position statement is not a message, such as, I will not support higher taxes. This picture I have here is of George Bush in the 1988 convention. Read my lips, no new taxes. That was not a campaign message. That was a position statement. Referencing other people's accomplishments is not a campaign message. My colleagues in Congress, my future colleagues in Congress did this. We passed this. That is not a campaign message. The campaign message is why you're running. And the only way to make an effective campaign message is by appealing to people's hearts. How is your candidacy and office going to benefit my life? How are you going to make things better for me? Where do you come from, and what do you do, and why do you do it, so that I will be better off? You need to appeal to people's emotions. Remember what FDR and Barack Obama did in these videos that we've watched today. Guaranteed housing, becoming our best selves, restoring the last hope on earth, working together to accomplish something. He believed in us was a quote out of that first advertisement. Appealing to fear, FDR, coming out of a war, there will be hardships. We need to work together. Barack Obama, some people want to see us shut down. Those evil Tea Partiers want to see us shut down, and that was used in the advertisement. You need to combat that, and you need to turn that back on its head and say, I am the candidate who understands your pain. I see how my liberal opponent is passing these destructive policies and is denying you and your children a better life because of their actions. I'm going to actually care about you and help people. Now that narrative and that message is going to be different on every level, depending on what office you're running for and what level you're at. So saying I'm caring about you and going to help people in such and such way is going to vary from candidacy to candidacy. But that needs to be at the basis and why you're saying what you're saying, and the messaging of why you're saying what you're saying. It's because you care about the people in your community, you care about the people in your nation, and you want to help them. And you're going to prove to them exactly why what you want to do is going to help people. Detach yourself from the facts. Have the facts, but detach yourself from them and connect with the people first. Now, don't be mistaken. You can still be conservative and message to people's hearts. That is possible to do. You can still say that you want to help them, but still advocate for limited government, for free markets, for freedom in whatever area that you're running for. Reality is still a story. You can use real results and real statistics to supplement your narrative. Those are still important things. But if we want to persuade women or minorities or whatever group we're trying to get at, it can be any group that you're trying to reach, then we have to defend them and show that progressives are the ones that are playing them for suckers, that are trying to exploit, keep them under the thumb of government, ultimately profit politically from their suffering. If we can convince average regular voters that this is the actual agenda of progressivism, because it is, then we will succeed at winning elections and actually shrinking government. This is the only way to do that, is by connecting with people and standing up for people. One more example here in 2012, there's a teachers union strike in Chicago, which is of course Obama's hometown. And it actually wasn't a pay issue or something like maybe it was in Wisconsin a few years ago, but it was an issue of not wanting to do pay for performance for teachers. Well, who are the victims there? Ultimately, it's the children. It's the African American and Hispanic children in Chicago that were being hurt because bad teachers didn't want to work for their pay. But we never put a face on those victims. That was never something that was brought up in the campaign. And how effective could that have been that year? They will continue to demonize and destroy their opponents as the enemy of progress. This is kind of in summary now here of the things that we've been talking about. And we are ultimately against social justice and minority rights is the narrative. But we have got to counter these attacks by turning it around on them. It's them that are the problem. They are the ones that are trying to keep minorities under their thumbs and keep them voting for them and taking their votes for granted. They're the one that are exploiting the vulnerable, whether that's low-income individuals or the unborn. They're the ones that are exploiting. They are reactionary, and their policies have proven bankrupt. The policies that Bernie Sanders approves of are the reason that people in Venezuela are starving. It's those kind of narratives that we need to constantly bring up with people. It's not that we need to lower tax rates or that we do need to do those things, but that can't be at the central part of the message. So in summary, one more time, put the aggressors on defense. Make them defend their policies. Put faces to the victims, because those victims are real and their lives are actually being hurt by liberal policies. So don't be afraid to do that in a tasteful and tactful way. And start doing it right now. If you're running a campaign right now, please, please, please start connecting with people's hearts at the doors, at your public events, at radio interviews. Craft your message in a way that's going to connect with people and is going to make the left go on the defensive, because we've been the ones on the defensive for far too long. All right, that's the end of my presentation. Looks like I've left about 5 minutes for questions, which is great. If you guys would please check out, I got a bunch of social media handles there. AmericanMajority.org obviously is our website. You may have been there. My email is there if you want to send me a message or request a training in your area. Follow us on Twitter. I put a little plug in there for our new Colorado chapter as well. You can find us all over social media. If you just search American Majority, all of our accounts will come up there. Thank you so much. I will now take a few minutes for questions. I'll try to answer everything as best I can. I know people were asking questions throughout the presentation that I wasn't able to get to, but please, if you have any questions, let me know, and I will answer them here. Yes, there will be a copy of the training offered if you would like that. We always offer our slides out, and there's also resources online that you can see in a more general sense. Lots of good stuff on AmericanMajority.org/resources. All right, any other questions from anybody? Gotta be some out there. I hope that everybody who's in Canada was able to at least able to follow generally with a lot of my points. I know I focus pretty much solely on U.S. Races at the national level, so I tried to explain it as best I could. I hope I did a good job there. Okay, Mark asks, how do you deal with arguments based on the statement that progressives protect people from the powerful, that leaving them to fend for themselves leaves them at risk? So this is a narrative that we hear all the time from progressives. The powerful are out to get us, that we're ultimately abandoning people, leaving them at risk, because if we don't help them, then they're going to be hurt by our destructive policies that help the rich. I mean, the basic research of that is this: is liberals are cronies. Liberals are elite. They love to protect the rich. They love to give special privileges to businesses. They love to quote unquote get in bed with big business. They do this all the time, and you got to turn that around on them and say they're not helping. They're not protecting anybody from the powerful. They're the ones empowering the powerful. They're the ones who are trying to gentrify neighborhoods, and they're the ones who are doing business with big business through government means, through your tax dollars, giving breaks and subsidies to big businesses. You know, I mean it's that sort of argumentation that you need to turn back around on their heads. Now, of course, you should never just say, well, the government needs to pull out of every single handout program tomorrow. You know, that's not effective messaging, as you can probably get. But there needs to be practical steps speaking in generalities to these voters who are wondering about those things. You know, what do we really need to do to make the poor better off? You need to turn it back around on their head and say, we need to empower poor people, not to be under the government's thumb, but to have the ability and have the freedom to start their own businesses. There are a lot of people who can't start their own businesses because barriers to entry are too high. You know, you don't want to get too much in the weeds on those things when you're talking with voters into the specifics, depending on what level of campaigning you're at. But turn the arguments back on their head and say, are progressives really the ones protecting the middle class or protecting people who are impoverished? Is that what they're doing in Detroit or Chicago, where murders are through the roof? Is it really ever been proven that progressives are actually helping anybody, especially minorities or women? They haven't done anything for those people. They've abandoned them. They try to take their votes for granted and keep them under their thumb. So what is the messaging? This is from... Okay, what is the messaging on social issues such as gay rights? This is where conservatives seem to lose. While conservatives, you know, what is the messaging that we should go about with gay rights? Was the question. That's an issue that's very difficult right now. It's something that obviously has legally been quite in flux the last few years. The LGBT lobby has been very successful at what they've done to fight for gay marriage in the United States, especially. You know, depending on what race you're on, you want to be careful about that. If you're running for county commissioner or if you're running for state house, depending on what kind of district you're in, you don't necessarily want to tackle that and say, you know, my job as a state representative is to make sure that gay marriage is outlawed in Colorado. That shouldn't be the primary part of your messaging. You will get asked that, and you should stand for your principles, whatever those are. But don't make something like that. Don't make something like that like a primary focus of your campaign, depending on what campaign you're in. Yes, correct. Not all conservatives are anti-gay. What we should really be saying is we want all people to be able to succeed in life, and private relationships are private relationships. You know, the issue of gay marriage may be decided by the courts. It may not meet my job. Now, there are all these things that you can deflect at if you don't have a great answer for it, and you can turn it back around and say, but we want to make sure that everybody's empowered to start their own business, or everybody's empowered to have a better life because they can get a good job because we actually have a free free market. All right, I'll take like one or two more questions here. We're getting close to the end. Anybody else have any questions? All right. Well, thank everybody. I thank everybody so much for being a part of this today, of this international webinar. We will be having 3 more of these once a month throughout the summer. I need to probably check on those dates. I'm not exactly sure off the top of my head what the dates are. We are very glad to have you here. They're really great tools to use. American Majority, again, offers these trainings obviously online, but also in person. So if you want to request a training in your area, a local training, please go online. We have a request form on there for American Majority, at least on the American Majority side, and you can request a training in your area. We love to help activists. We love to help candidates as much we can accomplish their conservative goals. Again, please follow us on social media and visit our website if you can. Thank you, everybody, again so much for being a part of this today, and have a great rest of your day.